Hey, Michael, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. How's everything going on your end?
It's good, man. Good to be here. I've been a fan of your content for a long time, so it's a little bit surreal to see you here in person. And I just appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Same with you. I see your content all the time on X. Great content. You're constantly talking about Bitcoin. You're talking about why people should own it. And I want to actually get your thoughts on something specific. Why should people dollar cost average into Bitcoin?
So I'm sure a lot of Bitcoiners can relate to this. I'm sure you've done it on your end, but like you feel that euphoria and the Bitcoin price is going up, and it's just so much of a thrill that you throw more money at Bitcoin than you uh, inevitably watch it go back down a little bit after the euphoria runs off. Dollar cost averaging is essentially just a way to mitigate those kind of situations and reduce the risk that you're going to have deep regret of buying the top. I really don't regret any of the buying of the top that I've done over the course of the years. I'm still grateful for all of them, but it just reduces the mental bandwidth that's required.
Yes.
If you're just constantly buying every single day, um, that thing that we all do when we live in the fiat system of like having to hyper manage our investments, understand how the stock market works, like these kind of things, it just like fades away. You can just consistently buy, you know, perfectly that your value is going to be saved via Bitcoin, and it's just going to keep going up over time. And it's just the the amount of mental friction that you can reduce by dollar cost averaging is just, I think, hugely understated by Bitcoiners, and it's probably one of the biggest things outside of even just price. Just the fact that you can just do that and know with such a high degree of confidence that your value is going to be secured into the future is just brilliant.
Yeah, I love the fact that you can buy as much as you want to. A lot of people still don't understand that. They still don't understand that Bitcoin can be split into 100 million units. Can you talk about that?
Oh man, this is still to this day probably one of the biggest misconceptions. Like especially in the more normie crowd, like are people that aren't as familiar with it, and I'm just introducing to you for the first time. We're talking about, they're like, it's $100,000. I can't afford that. Um, the analogy that I make frequently is that the entire system of the entire economy of the world could run on one Bitcoin. These things are infinitely divisible. And the nature of a programmable currency, you're able to have sub Satoshis, like you can even do that on the Lightning Network currently. So we could do everything we can do with Bitcoin right now instead of 21 million on one Bitcoin. Um, and in the future, at some point in time, like one Bitcoin is going to be enough to subsist entire sub economies. Um, and I think that's really important to understand that even just these small chunks of Satoshis are more than enough to get started and like, get some skin in the game and start understanding and using this thing.
I think one of the hardest things for people to do is to study Bitcoin without owning it because you need to have some skin in the game, right? If you don't have any skin in the game, you're not going to put in the time. A lot of people who I've seen that a lot of people who like altcoins, they haven't they don't have Bitcoin. Like in the last cycle, I was getting a lot of comments from people saying, "Oh, Bitcoin is a waste of time." I was posting about like at the very top in 2021. So people were saying, "Oh, instead of," at the time I was posting about stocks, people were saying how you should buy altcoins. Altcoins are going to be what really get you the wealth. You're going to get wealthy by the end of 2021, and they're just it was just people don't understand it, right? And because it's so difficult to study Bitcoin without actually having some skin in the game, uh, they don't do the deep dive, and a lot of them have these misconceptions of where it's going. What's the biggest misconception that you've heard about from people talking about Bitcoin?
There's so many; it's hard to pick one. Yeah, the to your point before, I totally like give the misconceptions is just how much like actually owning the thing changes stuff. I think something that we often struggle to convey as Bitcoiners is like how much actual ownership of the thing changes stuff. A lot of the times we want to go and start and explain how much just uh, Bitcoin is going to save the world, bring world peace, and all these grandeur like things we think this could change for the world, which I 100% agree with. Don't get me wrong, but very frequently is that first bit of like greed that brought a lot of us to the system. And I think we don't like to be honest about that all the time. Not all of us, but many of us, and certainly myself. Sometimes I get so excited about all the ways that Bitcoin could change the world, but actually owning some, seeing it go up in price, watching the swings of the market and those things, and starting to understand what it truly means to be an unrestricted free market helps people understand this thing deeper. Like The first time that you own Bitcoin and you watch it drop by $5,000 overnight because of some crisis in the world when it's the only liquid thing trading, that those moments I think are when the most deep understandings of Bitcoin are actually earned. Because you see, like, okay, well, the stock market's closed right now, but this thing's trading. And like, what does that mean? Like, I could trade it whenever I wanted to. I could sell it whenever I wanted to for any possible reason. And those specific moments, I think, bring a deep understanding and can only be gained through the actual action of ownership, not through just watching this thing from afar.
Yeah, can you explain why Bitcoin falls? So like let's say for example there was I think it was between Iran and Israel
Mhm.
when Bitcoin dropped a big amount. I don't remember how much it fell, but it fell a significant amount. Can you explain why that something like that would happen compared to let's say the stock market?
I vividly remember that one. Basically, it's the first time we've ever had this insanely liquid and completely global system for anybody to trade and use whenever they want, wherever they want. And there's a lot of actors that don't understand Bitcoin as deeply or don't use it for the same reasons. Like for me, it's this store of value that I like put a giant amount of my time and investment into. But for a lot of actors, they view it as this risk asset. So for those people, whenever there's some kind of crisis or situation that happens, it's the quickest and most liquid thing that they can sell off immediately to then throw their money into something else in the market, kind of like arbitraging the accessibility of Bitcoin. And that's a big part of the reason it sells off quickly. And very frequently, it's for silly reasons. So, like literally, as of yesterday, the DeepSeek AI was released, and the market just went crazy about it. It's
Tanked. Yeah.
completely irrational, honestly, right?
Yeah.
Especially Bitcoin. It's like, man, if anything, we just became like a more abundant species with cheaper AI. But anyway, but still, like the price is trading off for almost the exact same kind of reasons where people that have deep amounts of capital and have a little bit of Bitcoin will sell it off to buy some other asset or for various different reasons of fear or whatever like that. And that's not even to mention the algorithmic stuff that happens on Bitcoin as well. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. Those moments specifically are when I try the hardest to buy. Like in addition to dollar cost averaging, if I have any extra capital, it's like boom, the market's being irrational on this thing. Throw a little bit of chunk in, even if it's just a few sats.
Yeah, I feel like those are the hardest times to buy, but then those are the most rewarding. So let's say, for example, when FTX collapsed, a lot of people were worried. They were thinking, this thing is going to zero. It's going to negative 1,000. You may have seen the video of Peter Zahan saying that it's going to negative 1,000. That's when a lot of people are worried and they're scared and they're thinking that this thing is going to zero. So how would you, what would you say to somebody who wanted to know, um, why they should buy at those times? How would you explain it to them?
There is, I kind of choose two perspectives here. The first one, just like personally, the thing that has increased my conviction of Bitcoin is buying during those times. It's sort of like putting action whenever you feel that way, forcing yourself kind of just like through a mental discipline of whenever this thing goes down, I understand it deeply. I'm going to continue to stay long my position and like I truly understand this. Um, in addition to that, it's also this game you're essentially playing with a bunch of other people in the world. If you understand Bitcoin, you are every time you feel an internal emotion or fear, the market's feeling that same way. Like we are a single node in the market, so to speak. And whenever you feel a certain way, like I think it's important to watch those emotions within yourself. Recognize that probably almost everybody in the market is feeling that way. Number just went down for a bunch of people. Um, and if you can be one of the few that takes advantage of that dip in emotions and yeah, buy some more sats, you very frequently are rewarded. Just historically, like times like that have always been really, really, really lucrative to buy.
Why do you feel like why do you feel like there's so much fear around this thing? I feel like there's so many people who are worried. They see the dip and they think, oh, it's going to zero. They don't zoom out for whatever reason. I think that's the reason for me. Like when they look at the price, they see that, oh, in the short term it's gone down 20, 30, 50%, 10, even, I mean, this time it was even down. How much was it down? Like a few percent, maybe
Mhm.
3, 4%. And people are freaking out. Like they're so scared. They're thinking, oh, it's going to zero. It's dipped below 100K. It's going to zero. Why do you think that people are so worried about the price? Like, is it because they just don't understand the fundamentals?
I think that's a huge part of it. I think something else is that we typically live in this like padded protective world with fiat where things are backstopped and not allowed to fail. Analogy I frequently have heard about the value of nature versus nurture is like trees in a greenhouse where they can grow up, look beautiful, but then a single push can topple them all over because they haven't experienced the variance of nature with wind
Mm,
and other things. So like they've become just weak. I think that happens in the fiat world a lot too, where our systems are backstopped by money printing, like the banking one, just as one singular example of that, but government bailouts and everything. That these wild price movements, rapid swings, and volatility is something we've typically been afraid of, told to be afraid of, or is viewed as this bad thing. In reality, that's the way that the natural world works. And oftentimes, Bitcoin is the first touch point that any of us have had with like this true volatility. It just it's kind of alien to a lot of people right away. And I think because of that, especially when you're earlier onto Bitcoin, it's particularly hard to stomach some of those swings. But again, if you do, it's lucrative, and you'll be a better person for dealing with it and potentially buy more.
yeah, that was a great analogy. Trees in a greenhouse. I feel like today we're pretty much trying to avoid volatility as much as we can. That's pretty much the reason why we have the dollar for people who are, I would say, financially illiterate, people who don't understand the financial system. They save in the dollar, and then everybody else who actually understands it, who figures out that volatility is normal. Volatility is, as Michael Saylor would say, volatility is vitality. You need volatility in a system for it to actually get through all of the negatives, to be able to deal with competition. For example, let's say if because of Bitcoin, I think the U.S. dollar has become more volatile
Mhm.
because now the U.S. government has to print more in order to keep the entire system from collapsing. But more and more people are they're diverting those funds instead of putting them into buying random stuff that they don't need. They're putting it into Bitcoin, and that basically breaks their entire system. So over time, they need more and more money. They need to print more and more cash in order to support that uh that development. So like if we go back to the greenhouse example, it's like they need to put more and more soil on the ground to make sure that the tree doesn't collapse. Would you agree with that? Would you say that that's
Oh yeah, it's a that kind of analogy is prevalent in a lot of things, like a fear of pain or fear of
mm,
just a fear in the first place, like avoidance of those things. If you do it enough, you'll become weaker because of it. It's kind of like one of those principles that exists in our interpersonal life, but also exists in a much wider scale. Of the soil one too. That's a perfect continuation of it. And Bitcoin does just early evolve like a natural thing, changing and adapting to stimulus, and specifically the way that like energy incentives are relating to Bitcoin too is very similar to that.
yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people think is that if the U.S. government doesn't adopt Bitcoin, that's then it's going to go to zero. It's not going to work. I strongly believe against that. Would you? What would be your thoughts on that?
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. It does not matter at all. It's kind of been a funny thing watching Bitcoiners start to like try to affect policy in the U.S. government to get Bitcoin like inside of it a little bit. I have a ton of respect for the people that are doing that. A lot of people in Bitcoin, kind of myself included, are pretty anti-government. They kind of like are anti-system, like want to like we got into Bitcoin because it's this thing outside of it. But just the nature of the incentive alignment that Bitcoin causes, like we just talked about, where if you own some, you literally become a different person through the incentives. You understand it more deeply in the same way that that applies to the individual. I also think that applies to larger systems. So even though like I think the government owning some could potentially align some of those incentives in an interesting way. So I would like to see it happen to some degree. I don't really want to see them like back the dollar by Bitcoin necessarily, but I don't know. I'm not like particularly knowledgeable about it. But the thing that I am very confident in is that a little bit of Bitcoin ownership is going to change a person that owns it, and it's going to make the world a bit better place because of the incentives. So yeah, I definitely agree that it's not going to like make or break Bitcoin. Like it's just a silly um, misunderstanding of Bitcoin, I think. But I'm watching closely. Oh,
Bitcoin is generational wealth, and to secure it, you need to make sure that you take self custody. Most of you still haven't taken self custody, and you're taking a serious amount of risk by leaving your Bitcoin on an exchange. Don't be one of those people who lost all of their Bitcoin by leaving it on an exchange that went bankrupt. Instead, reach out to the cybersecurity experts at The Bitcoin Way. Their patient and thorough one on one training teaches you how to self custody your Bitcoin properly, how to run your own Bitcoin node and protect your privacy, and how to set up de Googled privacy phones to make sure that nobody is spying on you. They can even help you explore Plan B residency programs to maximize your family's options. So when you're ready to go down the right rabbit holes, schedule a free consultation at www.thebitcoinway.com/Rajat. The best investment you can make is buying Bitcoin. The second best investment is securing it properly. Make sure that you don't delay because your generational wealth and self sovereignty are at stake. Go to www.thebitcoinway.com/Rajat to schedule a free consult today. We go back to the phrase "you buy Bitcoin at the price you deserve." So I personally think that the only thing that this is gonna impact is how much Bitcoin the U.S. government can have. Right,
Mm-hmm.
at some point, let's say today they can buy. Let's say today their goal is to buy 1,000,000 Bitcoin. Eventually, that goal is going to drop to 100,000 because there's going to be nothing available. I actually don't think that the bill to accumulate 1,000,000 Bitcoin is going to work out. I don't think they're going to be able to get that done because there's not enough Bitcoin available for people for the U.S. government to buy, especially at these prices.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If the price goes up, of course, there's going to be people who sell. Maybe let's say if Bitcoin goes to $10 million, maybe I'll sell a little bit of Bitcoin, buy a mansion for myself, sell like zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, buy a massive house, buy a fast car,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm good to go. But that's really all they're gonna get from me, right? But then even then, I mean, the I think the time preference is what Bitcoin really changes about people. At least that was what it changed about me. What do you think Bitcoin changed the most about how you think on a day to day basis?
Oh, the time preference thing was huge for me too. I'm a writer. That's like one of the reasons I started my Twitter account in the first place, is to write stuff. And there's a lot of just like creating very short term art or like very quick things that'll like ride the wave of some trend, like a lot of just like
Mm,
fiction that does that kind of thing. And um, the Bitcoin low time preference perspective has really like made its way into a bunch of aspects of my life, and one of them is very much writing, like creating things that I will be proud to represent in 20 years time. I just crazy low time preference, like investing tons in this now, and like, we'll see what happens with it. But there's a deeper kind of meaning and that I think can be gained through pursuits in those things. Um, yeah, and that's just one element. And others, like I literally have a kid now than I would have had more quickly, or I had him with more confidence than I would have pre-Bitcoin. Like the financial flexibility, the certainty that like this value that I store will continue increasing over time. Definitely gave me way more optimism about the future and way more long-term planning for starting a family and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've learned over time. I've also noticed, back to what you were saying about art, for
Mm-hmm.
example. I think one thing that Bitcoin got me to start thinking about is actually it was Bitcoin and it was Seyfried Namus's book, The Bitcoin Standard. It got me to start thinking more about how the things around us, like the things that we enjoy all the time, it's art, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have music that has been created 20, 30 years ago, and we're still listening to it. But the reason why we're listening to it is because the person who created it, they put in the time, they put in the effort, and it was probably something that they took a long time thinking about, right? And in today's economy, you can't really do that because if you take too long making your decisions, the value that you have will just disappear. I feel like what Bitcoin will do is it's going to improve how businesses operate. It's going to improve how um, instead of having to make these impulse decisions to pursue some kind of business opportunity. Have you heard of tahinis?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so tahinis they're I go to their restaurant here and there, and I've noticed that their food just gets better and better. They have like these random new ideas that I don't really see at other places. Like they have this blueberry shawarma, and
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of that before. To me, it was just crazy. I was like, okay, this is something that I personally wouldn't adopt. But I mean, again, it's because if I had started a business on a fiat standard, all I can see is that the money that I'm putting towards it is a sunk cost. It's never going to come back to me. But if you take these risks on a Bitcoin standard, I feel like there's a lot more ways to be rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
Would you? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, hugely so. I felt this inside myself too. When I started writing this novel, I've been working on it like hours a day for 3 years now. It's been a long process,
Wow.
but some early in the phase of it, it was like, man, I just want to like get this thing out here. But the longer I've been in Bitcoin, even though like the price is going up, it's been a whole trip in like the process of writing it. But like, I'm continually reminded of like how important it is to not just do something short term, to like make something long term, that like this will be good for a long time. And the fact that I feel so confident in Bitcoin to protect my wealth, like I don't feel the desire to take these like short term sacrifices for quick paydays. Like I can just make this thing and make it the absolute best version of the story that I believe in. And we'll see. It may or may not be successful. Who knows? I have a ton of faith that it will because I put a lot of effort into it. But Bitcoin, in a large way, helped give me the confidence to do that, which is kind of interesting. Sort of like stabilizing yourself to allow you to create more beautiful things in the world. And that's just the way that it's exhibited in me. I know it's exhibited itself in so many people. Like I guarantee this podcast is downstream of that same feeling for you. You know, it's like you begin to feel this kind of like certainty for the first time, and you're just inspired to give back because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to think, I used to try to follow the trends
Mm-hmm.
before I studied Bitcoin. So let's say on Instagram, I'd post about whatever's happening in the news, whatever the biggest things are on a day to day basis, like what people need to know about what's happening today, tomorrow. But now I focus more on just the long term stuff. So let's say instead of focusing on news, I focus on evergreen content, even though it's much harder to make. It's way more difficult to make an evergreen video than it is to talk about, let's say, what's happening with DeepSeek, for
Mm-hmm.
example. You can go explain what's happening with DeepSeek. You'll get the short term validation from your audience that, okay, this is what we want. But after that first, let's say, day, 2 days, 3 days, why would anybody watch that video anymore? Right? The way that I see it, let's say, for example, even for your book, if you create something that's evergreen, if you create something that people can read 10, 20, 100 years from now. I actually mentioned this to you before we even started recording. I want to make this podcast in a way that people can listen to it whenever they want to, because dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, dealing with the volatility is always going to be a thing. As long as the dollar exists, is always going to be a thing. So like exactly what you said, this podcast is definitely a result of that. I've been trying to create something of value that people will see and they'll learn from 10, 20, 30 years from now. These videos are going to be around forever, right? I mean, maybe YouTube will change, but the people will download these videos, they'll save them, they'll show them to their family and friends, they'll do whatever they need to with them. But that's the point. I feel like the long-term perspective is so important here.
It takes on a life of its own, and in a way that those short-term ones just never can. And it takes a lot of resilience and kind of like trust and faith in the patterns and the systems to do that. But I think it's the way, and I think Bitcoin inspires that in a lot of people. I've certainly heard that sentiment echoed from others as well.
Yeah, my sister-in-law recently had a kid, and I was telling her it's difficult, like yourself. When did you have your kid?
Like 18 months ago.
18 months ago. Okay, so she had her kid about a month ago, and I was telling her it's so difficult. I don't have kids myself, but I
Mm-hmm.
was telling her it's so difficult. It's an investment,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're gonna have this whatever you teach this kid, whatever you put in their mind, whatever you feed them, whatever environment you keep them in, it's an investment, right? They're gonna be impacted by that for the next however long of their life. If they live to 100 years, that first 3, 4, 5 years is going to impact them for the next 95 years. That's crazy to me. And again, it's more low time preference behavior. If you put in the time to help your kid navigate, to learn, to figure out how the world works, I mean, they're just going to be a better person because of it.
We've seen it historically too. Like I live in a place where there's a lot of houses that are relatively short or like high time preference. They're built mechanically like the same. There's a bunch of them in similar layouts and everything. And then if you walk around a city in Europe, it's like, man, this was a different kind of perspective. It's deeper than just the aesthetics. It's clearly a different kind of person that was inspired to build these things. And I think the systems around us, specifically the financial ones, are largely part of that. There's other things too, but like I think it just is more inspiring to live in those systems, and it's compounding too. So I think like Bitcoin was a spark in a lot of ways that kind of allows this abundance to begin, and it just is going to continue expanding, 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 and bringing a richer and richer future for all of us.
Yeah, definitely. What would you say about I have a thesis where I think that because Bitcoin is such a low time preference asset, you have to have low time preference if you're going to buy Bitcoin. Even trading it day to day, Even just buying it, you're gonna buy it and the price is gonna drop. And you have to have that low time preference. You have to expect that you're gonna be feeling stupid for the next 3 to 4 years. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how much you studied. You're going to feel stupid for the next 3 to 4 years if you buy Bitcoin because that's how the cycles work, right? You're never, at least for me,
Oh yeah,
I've never bought Bitcoin and had it go straight up,
yeah.
right? It's never happened. I actually feel like that's going to break the legacy financial system because it's going to teach people how to wait,
Mhm.
how to make better financial decisions, how to not spend money on just stupid impulse purchases. I feel like the legacy financial system relies on that. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's the whole debt-based system is predicated on short-term like thinking and high time preference ideals. I see it in myself now. Like what's kind of funny is that like Bitcoin has trained us to stomach the volatility in so many different ways. Like financial markets are one, like holding other stocks to like I know MicroStrategy stuff. Like it's I own some shares of that. It's like crazy easy for me to see volatility because I'm just like so used to it from Bitcoin. But that's only one example. Like it also exhibits itself in your life too. Like times when things are hard or things get crazy, like I'm like, all right, you kind of are used to that wildness that like you've actually touched what the natural free market. So the like soft world out there that's protected by fiat is a little bit easier to deal with in stomach. You're kind of just ready for it. You're hardened, and
Yeah, how do you navigate that? Like, let's say for example, if you see Bitcoin's price, we're gonna go into a bull, but we're gonna have bear markets. There's no way that we're not gonna have Bitcoin drop like 34. I don't know how much it's gonna drop. It probably won't drop like 70, 80%, but we're gonna see it drop 50, 60%. How would you how would you navigate that? Would you trade in and out of your Bitcoin? Would you sell it and expect to be able to buy back later?
absolutely not. No, I have been kind of like we started about with the DCAing. Like the longer I've done it, the more I realize I'm pretty poor at timing these things. And I'm definitely not going to be trying to do that. Um, yeah, the timing of all of it is just so hard to do. Um, I'm just going to likely change my media diet slightly, or like make sure I really pare down on like the long term Bitcoin centric learning about stuff. Like I already do that. I already really enjoy all the great Bitcoin content out there, but really like doubling down on some of the more hardcore Bitcoin content, just like kind of help myself with the resilience mentally, and then study more. Like the deeper you understand what the thing is, the easier it is to actually make it through those periods. Like it already feels so much different now. Like I mentioned the book, but like writing chapters when the price was $16,000 was a very different experience than writing the chapters when the price was $108,000. I wrote like parts of the book under each of those days, and like
Yeah.
to date, some of my favorite scenes and like a whole bunch of the ending was written. The price was sub $20,000, and like it's a different vibe. Like certainly in the bear markets, and I kind of enjoyed parts of it for sure. But like getting to the roots of why you're in Bitcoin, some of the freedom elements and the financial sovereignty that you gain through it, like really coming back to that, I think was the thing that I'll for sure try to do again in the next bear market because I 100% agree with you. Like there will be bear markets. That's the way the world works, right? Like it's delusional to think otherwise. I know people are like just thinking we're in it's like um, the final cycle or whatever, and yeah, they're gonna have a rude awakening.
Yeah, emotions are always going to have a place in this. I don't think we can get away from um the emotional side of things because there's always going to be people who are selling because they're scared. There's always going to be people who are buying because of FOMO. We're going to I think that the drops are going to mute a little bit instead of like I said, instead of dropping 70, 80%, maybe we'll drop 40%, and that'll be the end of the bear market. But then what's going to happen is people are going to see that 40% drop, they're going to think, oh, it's going to drop 80%. So I'll sell when it's down 40% and I'll buy back at half the price.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't I do that? I feel like those people are just going to feel extremely stupid.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that towards the end of this year. Who knows exactly how the year plays out, but what's been kind of funny to me, a trend that I've been watching closely. I actually would really love to hear your opinion on this too. But I keep asking price predictions to friends out there, random people, or even on Twitter, like quite a bit. Like the thing I've noticed is there is a very large cohort of people that thinks Bitcoin's going to be topping out around $150,000. Like they think that we're just like going to have one step upward and then it's going to be 100% gone.
I've noticed that, yeah.
And the majority of those people, in my experience, are crypto people. Like they're XRP people that are in my DMs or like in my messages or whatever, or they're people that are like they've conceded that Bitcoin's going to be around, but they refuse to believe that it like is going to be Bitcoin, right? And there's the Bitcoin people, which are like always a chunk above that, typically in their price things. Like, and who knows? Like, I really don't like to predict the prices. Like, I could easily see that being the case, but it's kind of a funny dynamic here where, yeah, there's a lot of them, and they are very convinced that Bitcoin's going to be done at $150,000, and I guarantee you they're going to sell. I have a couple personal acquaintances that have already told me they're planning to sell at 150K. So I think they're going to be maybe right for a week or two, maybe a month, but I think they're going to be very, very, very wrong in the longer term.
Yeah, in the long term, I think they're definitely going to be wrong. I can't see. So let's say, for example, with how things are going right now, um, a lot of people are going to see. Let's say Bitcoin goes to 150K and then it drops.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have no allocation. I think that's the thing that everybody's missing here. Most people have no Bitcoin. Like if you talk to the people around you, if I talk to the people around me regularly, the only people that have Bitcoin are the ones that I've convinced to buy Bitcoin. Other than that, they don't own it because they don't see it, they don't understand it, they don't know where it's going, they have no idea where it's going. So I think that's going to be, I think they're going to end up being wrong if they think that it's going to top out at 150K and then it's going to come back down to like 18K or whatever. That's
Mm-hmm.
what people think.
Yeah.
A lot of people genuinely think that they think that's going to drop down to 30K. Like there's this one guy on X. His name is Whale Wire or something. I don't know if you've probably seen his post. Something, I forgot what his name is, but he says, "Oh, Tether is going to collapse and Bitcoin is going to go to 30K." But I think that's the thing, right? With a lot of people. So, for example, let me give you an example. So, at one point, because I was stupid, because I didn't understand how Bitcoin worked, I was shorting Bitcoin. I was buying. I don't know if you know about the ETF BITI.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's a short Bitcoin ETF. I had that, and I owned it from when Bitcoin was at 25K down to 20K. This was in 2023, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
early 2023. So it dropped from 25K to 20K. And I was thinking, oh, it's going lower. It's going lower. I'm going to double my money on this thing. And then it just skyrocketed. And it felt stupid, right? So I think when people don't have exposure to Bitcoin, the biggest issue is that they want a lower price. Like when you don't own Bitcoin, you want a lower price. When you own Bitcoin, you want a higher price. I think that's exactly what you're saying here too. With people who own Bitcoin, they think that it's going to go a chunk higher than 150K. The people who don't own Bitcoin, they think it's going to top out at 150K and it's going to fall back down. So I agree with that. I think a lot of the people who have altcoins, they're expecting an alt season.
Yeah.
They're expecting they're expecting altcoins to outperform Bitcoin. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I think this cycle is different. I think this cycle there's a lot of institutional interest and they're only looking at Bitcoin. The institutions who go for altcoins, I think they're going to lose a significant amount of their capital.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I hugely agree. Um, Something I've also noticed in people is the excitement around Bitcoin stocks. Like there's a bunch of companies adopting Bitcoin strategies, micro strategies, some where all these miners now are adopting different variations of that same strategy and different like nuances to it and stuff. Um, and I think a lot of what had been previously the greed that people associate with altcoins is going to get wrapped up into Bitcoin equities. Um, just like at least we've seen that so far. Again, like to your point, like I'm very biased because I own some Bitcoin and I definitely think it's going to do better. But um, I have seen in a couple people that are interested in Bitcoin, like they first bought MicroStrategy, first bought a Bitcoin miner, thought it was interesting, and then they started like learning more about Bitcoin. Whereas the top of funnel before may have been something like Ethereum or Solana or whatever, and I think that's changing a lot. And I think that as these economies and the alts evolve, like their primary use case is just becoming memes at this point. Like decentralized finance is yeah, like so uninteresting and continually failing. We just saw Thor Chain, I think, get destroyed over the last like few weeks here. It's just one of many. And how many more signals does the market need to give you until you're done playing these altcoin games and just like buy the real thing?
Yeah. What would be your thoughts on borrowing against Bitcoin?
I mean, I'm not inherently opposed. I've never done it. I have no intention of doing it in the near future, but I do think that like I'm kind of in like a very long-term saving for the future mindset right now. I have no desire to spend any Bitcoin, but there will be a time, right? Like I think it's important to empathize and understand like there are people that have been in Bitcoin 10 years that are ready to start like funding their life. Like, are they really short it because they're trying to like fund this life for themselves so they can educate about Bitcoin or something like? So doing that, well, being as long as possible seems like it makes a ton of sense to me. So being able to borrow against your Bitcoin to fund your lifestyle seems like a wise way to do that. I think that selling covered calls on Bitcoin equities is potentially a really good way to do that, where you keep as much potential skin in the game in Bitcoin as you possibly can, just selling off a little bit of your volatility and upside to do so. So again, I'm not doing either of those things right now, but I do think that it provides a really good way for people that want to be as long Bitcoin as possible to continue to live off their stack, which is where we're all trying to get to, I would imagine. Like, yeah.
At some point, at least, yeah, for sure. I personally don't like the idea of borrowing against Bitcoin because what you have to do is you have to give your Bitcoin to someone, they have to take custody of it. It's exactly what happened with Thorchain. So a lot of people were saying how with Thorchain you can borrow Bitcoin or you can borrow against your Bitcoin and there's no counterparty risk or something like that. I don't remember what the narrative was, but people were saying it, right? And even with these financial institutions today, we have companies like Ledin. We have different companies that are letting you borrow against your Bitcoin, but you have to give them your Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest concern is I don't care if people borrow against their Bitcoin. Go do what you need to. The way that I see it, though, you're taking that risk where if you're going to borrow again, let's say, for example, you need zero point 0.1 Bitcoin worth of cash of US dollars, you're going to need to give them zero point 0.2 Bitcoin.
Yep.
Because otherwise, because of the volatility, your Bitcoin is going to be liquidated pretty much right away. You might as well just sell it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the issue here is that instead of selling zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, you're having to risk zero point 0.2 Bitcoin. And that zero, or like instead of selling one Bitcoin, you're having to risk 2 Bitcoin. You're doubling your risk.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way that I see it. The way that I see it, I would rather increase my cash flows over borrowing against Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
because I mean I think that's a more sustainable way to do it. If I have to, I'd rather just sell my Bitcoin. Like for example, I bought this mic. I didn't have enough cash at the time, so I sold a little bit of Bitcoin, and I felt kind of stupid doing it. And of course, Bitcoin's price is up since then, but that's perfectly fine. I think the revenues that this mic produced for me have been much higher than the amount of Bitcoin that I created that I sold, and I'm perfectly okay with it. But it goes back to the low time preference behavior. If you have high time preference, if you prefer the convenience and the time that you um, that you save by selling your Bitcoin and you can consume with it, then you're going to make the wrong decisions. But if you sell your Bitcoin and you put it into another low time preference activity, I guess like this podcast, for
Mm-hmm.
example, this is very low time preference, at least in my opinion. I mean, over the long term, you're going to build yourself up to something that you probably wouldn't have been able to build otherwise. Like with lending, it just feels so risky. I don't think I can. I don't think I could be able to. I don't think I'd be able to sleep at night if I borrowed against my Bitcoin.
You perfectly articulated that big trade-off that I think people don't think about. There is like inherent in any of those strategies we just talked about is like the sacrifice of much larger of the portion. Like
Yeah.
you're going to sell just a little bit, you need to hold like 10x essentially that amount in for collateral, right? I'm curious if you've experienced this, but like the things that I bought in Bitcoin, like your microphone, I still very vividly remember like buying the thing and like I have a little bit of different gratitude for it. I also just enjoy like kind of the like voting with my Bitcoin, essentially like voting with my value for other people that have created stuff on
Yeah.
Bitcoin. Like it just feels good. Like and just enjoy buying stuff with Bitcoin a little bit. I know people are like, some people just will like save forever, never spend a single sat. And I pretty much just spend and replace when I do, but it feels good. I feel like I'm supporting the Bitcoin economies and systems.
Yeah, I was looking at. So I don't know if you know about Saifedean Ammous, the publishing house that he has. He accepted Bitcoin if you want to buy his books from
Mhm.
him. I paid in Bitcoin because he gave me a 10% discount. He gives everybody a 10% discount for paying with Lightning or with on chain Bitcoin. And I was looking at the values. So since I bought the book, I paid. I think it was something like 200,000 satoshis for those books. They
Mhm.
were worth at the time maybe 140 US dollars,
Mhm.
and it's doubled in that time. But it's been worth it. It's worth it. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with supporting his business. He created this value, even for your book, for example. If you accept Bitcoin, I'm going to pay for that in Bitcoin.
Mhm.
I feel like that'd be awesome. Just because if you're creating value, the way that I see it, if somebody's creating value and I'm trying to take that value from them, I want to give them value. I
Mhm.
don't want to give them pieces of paper that can be created out of nothing, especially if they understand how Bitcoin works. If they don't understand how Bitcoin works. I mean, you can't force somebody to take Bitcoin. But in your case, what exactly is your book about, if you don't mind me asking?
It's evolved a little bit, but primarily Bitcoin. On a higher level, it's about just like financial freedom too.
Mm,
It follows, actually, it spawned from a problem that I had, which is I'm a very analytical person. I love numbers. I'm sure you can relate with this. You do a fantastic job like putting together financial analysts on things. And I always struggled to convey Bitcoin to people that were more emotionally minded than myself. I think we all have that. There's a lot of Bitcoiners out there with wives or significant others that are in the family that are just like so much more emotional minded. Um, and I set out to write something that hopefully bridges that gap. So it follows around three different people. One of them grew up in a country with a hyperinflating currency that I did a ton of research on and kind of have like a very realistic life experience of her where you go through and kind of see how she grew up in this country, escapes her country with her keys in her head, and ends up doing a lot of other stuff. I won't spoil
oh,
kind of
amazing.
like the ending bits, but and then follows some crimes that are done using Bitcoin too. And then yeah, there's a lot of details there, but the core thing that was just like conveying that like understanding Bitcoin from an emotional perspective, seeing how it can be used by people, seeing the hope that it provides to people, and doing it from a few different characters' perspectives and encapsulated in this like story that's like crazy, thrilling, really interesting, and captivating. So even somebody who's not nerdy about money is going to be like, "This is cool. I want to learn more about it." Like focusing more on inciting the interest in Bitcoin rather than all the technical details, which I can nerd out about all day. I love the technical details. I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
Like it's I love that stuff, but um, I I've been deep into beta reading and editing and that stuff, and I can already attest to the fact that like just having people read it, they already are like way more interested in Bitcoin or like understood the concept that they did not previously. And I'm really optimistic that it could convey that to a lot of other people too. And it's just awesome. I love the story. I'm excited to share it out there.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm looking forward to reading it whenever you do come up with it. Obviously, don't rush.
Yeah,
Low time
low
preference
time
behavior.
preference, baby.
Make it the best thing you can. I mean, eventually, I think I'm sure people will appreciate it. People will like it. They'll see it as something that's definitely um, teaching them a little bit more about how Bitcoin works. I want to ask you a question that I ask all my guests. So the question is, what do you think is the most important downstream effect of Bitcoin?
Oh man, I've heard you ask this before. I was trying to come up with some like different, interesting answers, and I don't have any that are crazy unique. Like I've heard people talk about like its reduction of war incentives, and I think that one's really eloquent. The the low time preference, we've touched on that one so much, like over the course of this conversation. Um, I think that we're still underselling how deeply that could impact the average person. We've just described how it's changed each of our lives deeply, and I think that's only going to grow the more people that it touches and continues to um, associate with. But it's an interesting thing because there's so many different things. Like especially in writing this book, I tried to find like a single way to convey some of these points. And Bitcoin's so many things to so many different people, and it's doing so many different things. Like it's impacting energy systems in a way that I think is going to bring more bounty to different rural economies. It's like bringing financial freedom to places where people are getting stolen from by their governments. It's allowing people to escape their countries with their money in their head. It's like so many different things. It's just incredibly challenging not to be talking about it all the time. Like it's just an exciting thing, and I'm really grateful that for people like you, like building and Bitcoin, making Bitcoin podcasts, and I'm just grateful to have found it myself too, because it's made my life so much better, and I really want that for other people too.
Yeah, I think what you said there, the low time preference behavior, when more people are focused on the long term rather than the short term, I feel like it just leads to a better society
Mm-hmm.
because more people are thinking about how their kids are going to be impacted, how their grandkids are going to be impacted, how everybody else's kids are going to be impacted, right? If let's say for example, if I'm doing the right things and it helps your kid, that makes me happy, right? It makes what I'm doing so much more important, so much better, and so much more impactful because I know for a fact that let's say your kid, my I was mentioning my sister-in-law, her kid, all the kids that are born right now, they're being born into this world where people are degenerates.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the people, a lot of people are like you'd be. I'm whenever I see the news, I'm scared to see how many people are just willing to do the stupidest things
Mm-hmm.
ever, and it destroys society. It
Mm-hmm.
makes it much harder to live in a community with people who really don't care about you. right? And it makes it scary and scary. But then when with Bitcoin, for example, you have the low time preference behavior where you know that if you're working for me personally, if I'm working with a Bitcoiner, I know that they're going to give me what they promised.
Mhm.
They're not going to be in it for the quick dollar, quick buck, quick Satoshi. They're going to be in it to actually create a difference in the world because they've already seen Bitcoin appreciate. They've owned Bitcoin for a few years. So to them, it's not about money anymore, right? It's about building relationships, building the right products, building the things that actually make a difference in the world. And I really like that about Bitcoin. I really like that about how people think after they start adopting this technology.
People frequently use the analogy that like when money crosses borders, soldiers don't. Like there's a different version of that analogy, but that's the gist of it. Like what happens when savings crosses borders? When we're all using the same systems to save together. Like it incentive aligns between peoples of different countries that's never once happened before. Like that
Yeah.
is not priced in. Like
Uh,
what does that do to the world? Like it's going to change everything. And I still like it just feels like you're late sometimes when the price is going up to $100,000. But man, we are not late. This is the beginning of a new financial revolution.
Yeah, we're definitely not late. I think this is going a lot higher. Like just based on your tweets make me so bullish, man. I feel like there's so many people on Twitter who just constantly talk about how Bitcoin is going to go much, much higher.
Mm-hmm.
They're constantly talking about how you should dollar cost average. Your tweets stand out to me, man. Like I feel like it's so important to have this community. I feel like without people creating this kind of content, it would be so much more difficult to adopt, so
Mm-hmm.
much more difficult to go through the bear markets. And I actually feel like maybe that's part of the reason why there may not be that big of a bear market again. Just back to what we were talking about before, maybe this time the bear market's going to be 30-40% instead of being 80% because of all of the education. There are more Bitcoin podcasts than ever,
Mm-hmm.
more people creating value with Bitcoin, more merchants accepting Bitcoin, and those numbers are just going to keep increasing. There's no way to bring them down because more and more people are understanding Bitcoin.
Yeah, you don't
Once
go
you
out of this rabbit hole.
Exactly. Like once you understand where this is going, you want more Bitcoin. I've personally never met anybody who understands Bitcoin and doesn't want more.
Mm-hmm.
Like that alone to me, it just speaks volumes. So
Yeah, that hasn't happened before. It's going to be crazy. It's going to keep making the world so much more abundant too.
yeah, the abundance is key here because everybody can have what they need. It's going to lead to lower crime. It's going to lead to people not thinking about just what they can do with the money that they're going to rob from this guy. People not thinking about, oh, I'm going to carjack, I'm going to take this guy's car, I'm going to sell it to somebody somewhere else. I have a feeling that all those things are going to drop. People are going to actually be thinking more about the people around them rather than thinking about themselves. Like I went to Japan, which is a very high trust society.
Mm-hmm.
People are people trust each other. That's pretty much it. Like you see bikes that are $1,000, $2,000 sitting on the side of the street, and they're not even locked up. I was so shocked when I saw this. When I saw electric bikes, like in Toronto, if you see an electric bike, people will rob you for it. Like you could be sitting on it and people will take it from you. In Japan, you see this electric bike on the side of the road. Somebody's using it clearly for like food deliveries or something. It's not even locked. That's the kind of society that I want to live in. I want to live in the society where you don't have to lock your door because the people around you aren't starving. The people around you aren't thinking about themselves. They're thinking about the society as a whole. Those are the things that I think Bitcoin is going to change about the world, and I can't wait for it.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm very optimistic about it.
It's gonna be awesome. Hey, I want to ask you one last question. Do you have any last tips, last insights, anything that you want to talk about for my audience here?
I think drawing back to some of our early points about embracing the volatility, like this isn't just pain. Like these are growing opportunities, and in experiencing these dips and these challenges, the more of these you go through, you're not just building a bigger Bitcoin stack, you're actually building a better person. Like we each come through this journey and this thing makes us better. So to embrace that, realize that the bad things that are happening to you or the bad things like your portfolio going up or down isn't that big of a deal, but they're making you stronger. They're making you better. And to embrace that, like these are not just problems, they're opportunities.
Yeah, every dip gets easier to deal with.
Yep.
In every part of your life, not even just Bitcoin. Every For me personally, every Bitcoin dip has been easier to deal with. But after you understand what's going on around you, after you understand that the world is full of cycles, there's never going to be just constant highs. There's going to be highs and lows. growth is never linear. You're never going to see just complete. You're never going to see a chart just go straight up, like we saw with MicroStrategy, for example. A
Mhm.
couple months ago, MicroStrategy went all the way up to like $550. It was at $100 to start that run, went all the way up to $550. You don't see that in your day to day life. There's going to be dips, but the people who don't quite understand that there's going to be dips are the ones who, I guess, they don't get to take advantage,
Mhm.
right? Like even for, let's say, for example, for my YouTube channel, for our Twitter engagement, for example, like you see the number of impressions go up, then come down, go up, come down.
Mhm.
On YouTube, the number of views go up, come down, go up, come down. Right now, I'm actually like in real time. I'm in a dip right now on my YouTube.
Mhm.
My YouTube views are down significantly.
Mhm.
Perfectly fine. I'm going to keep working on the day to day actions that I can take to keep improving myself, to keep creating better content. I feel like that's, again, a result of learning how Bitcoin works and having that low time preference behavior.
Yeah, you literally learn that life lesson through Bitcoin. Like, I noticed that too. Like, my Twitter account is very much smaller following than yours, but just like I had so much faith that it will go up and down, it will be cyclical, but as long as you're consistent, you just keep at it, you will see good things. And because of our fiat world, there's so much short time preference, and people just have not learned that lesson. And I think the more you can delay gratification, invest in the future, and have trust in yourself, that it'll like go better. Like it's just going to make your life better. And Bitcoin is one of the many avenues that you can learn that lesson through.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Michael, that was really great. I really appreciate your time here. I'll mention your Twitter in the description below, just so people can go and follow you. I'm sure they found some value in this conversation. Anywhere else that people can find you?
No, that's pretty much it. Look forward to my book. It'll be out in the next 6 months or so here. I'll be very loud about it and sharing. So
Amazing. Maybe we'll do another episode
yeah, I love
at
that.
that time.
And follow Rajat. This is an amazing podcast. He puts out fantastic content, and I've learned so much from you. So thank you so much for having me on. It was really I'm grateful for it.
Appreciate it, Michael. I really, really appreciate your time. Great conversation. That was awesome. I'm sure that's going to be really informative for my audience here.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Awesome.